The next speaker is a world-renowned academic in her field with over 100 academic publications. She is accountability for delivery of the university's Global Strategy 2020 for world-changing research and will now enlighten us about the work with Centers of Excellence conducted at the University of Nottingham, titled The Beacons of Excellence. Lund University has a strategic partnership with the University of Nottingham, as you might know. Please give a warm hand to Professor Dame Jessica Corner.
Thank you very much. Really great to be here with you and enjoying being in Lund. So I'm going to talk a bit about the other side of the party, really, starting from the point of view of what universities themselves can do in relation to addressing sustainability goals, and our Beacons of Research Excellence programme, which has been absolutely about doing that. I don't know whether many of you know where Nottingham is. It's a middle-sized city, about 150 miles north of London, in the east of the country, in the Midlands, and it's in one of the so-called levelling up areas of England that our new Prime Minister is promising to look after, given the communities have just voted them into government. So we're having a lot of attention at the moment from ministers who want to visit and see what they can do in our region. So moving into this agenda then, I wanted to start from the point of view of I'm a steward, in a way, of a research ecosystem in the university, which is made up of many different parts. It's made up of faculties, schools, subjects, disciplines, also things that we do to try and foster interdisciplinary research working. And over and on top of that, we developed a new initiative around Beacons of Research Excellence, which I'm going to tell you more about. But we're not alone in doing this. I mean, we've been hearing from Heikki and yourselves. But this idea of thinking about a way of large-scale, challenge-led research, interdisciplinary research entities is kind of the order of the day. I mean, this is Horizon Europe and Mariana Mazzucato's ideas that are being taken up into a new Horizon Europe programme around mission-oriented research programmes. We have the DARPA agency in the United States, which doesn't necessarily have the end goal in mind, but it's certainly targeting research at very defined areas. And National Science Foundation have actually said that convergence research is one of the 21st century's 10 big ideas for them, which is about integration across multiple fields that were once very, very distant and distinct disciplines, actually is required in order to tackle some of the most challenging issues of our day, in order to catalyse different scientific discovery and innovation. And actually, because of these fields that need to come together, whether it's big data, whether it's artificial intelligence, whether it's genomics, whether it's a whole range of different issues, actually are required by most things in order to have them underpinning the way we're going to look at things for the future. So these are important ideas. And in a way, what we were working on was the idea of how do you develop convergence research in a large, complex university. And it's also something about what is the core purpose of universities in the 21st century. And addressing sustainability has to be at the very heart of our missions. We have enormous capabilities that we can bring to bear on these very difficult but tractable problems of the 21st century. And really, and I think actually Heikki was just saying this from the point of view of the Finland Academy, universities are increasingly expected to be coherent actors in the mix and not just recipients of funding. We need to act strategically in a clear and deliberate way in order to address challenges. So there's something about redoubling our efforts collectively and pursuing these goals of sustainability in a world that is absolutely needing that. So at the University of Nottingham, we set out to establish a programme of beacons of research excellence. These weren't meant to be just the bringing together of capabilities in research like you would perhaps in an institute or aligning areas together. It was actually to invite groups of academics who are already world-leading in their respective fields to bring together mission-driven, transdisciplinary research entities, to create them with a very deliberate approach to address global challenges around sustainability goals. They needed to be strategic in focus, challenge-led, ambitious, and aspire to become one of these beacons. They needed to think very big and explore way beyond what the university could ever provide for these groups of academics to do. And we asked them to think about the mission that they would pursue and what would they need if they were going to fulfill it, and how and what would that look like. And in the end, we chose 6 areas. In fact, Stacey Sorensen was on the panel back in 2016, where we brought together a panel of international and senior advisors to look at all the possible areas we could have created in a beacon, and in the end we chose 6. And I want to tell you a little bit about the timeline and the process that we've gone through to establish these beacons. It didn't happen all at once. There was a sort of phased approach. They didn't all develop at the same pace. They needed to put proposals together. They needed to form business cases that the university would feel were appropriate. We set them off with some enabling funding, because to go from a standing start to an established entity is quite difficult in short order. And then we set them off. And we're now in this process of beginning to look at what's come out of the programme and thinking about what does it take to establish these as sustainable entities embedding in the university where we think that they are going to be successful in the long term. And it's been quite an interesting journey. And reflecting back, we have thought of probably 4 different stages in the evolution of these beacon entities. There was the startup phase, selecting them and setting them up, identifying, importantly, a single accountable leader who would be responsible for the beacon, the programme, and their colleagues. There was a next stage, which the beacons are largely just coming through to the other side of now, which was establishing themselves, which was about putting the capabilities, people, activities, facilities, equipment together in order to be able to go after this particular scientific or other programme that they were going to pursue. The thing that actually surprised me was actually how difficult it seems to be for the beacons to be very clear about what that scientific programme was and what was the mission that they were actually really going to be facing into. It seemed to take this sort of iterative process between the core group going out to academics, getting them to come together, getting them to identify projects, initiatives and things they wanted to do. And from that, kind of beginning to shape what this mission was and the programme that they were going to pursue. And the more developed of the beacons are now in this third phase, where they're now actively working to fulfil the mission. And we can begin to see what are the outcomes that have come out of that. And then we're looking in the next 2 years to how we will shift towards making them sustainable entities within the university. Where might they sit? How do they find themselves to be self-financing? What do they evolve into in terms of large, sustainable, very significant, we hope, and externally funded, mission-driven entities until they've fulfilled the thing that they set out to do, if that's feasible. So I thought I'd just quickly give you some examples of them so you can get a feel for the sort of things that these beacons are doing. Wright's Lab was one of our earliest. Interestingly, it's very much at its heart a social science-driven beacon, which says that it doesn't always and only have to be about a sort of STEM-based or science-based subjects. This group have set out to contribute to ending modern-day slavery, which is a goal for the United Nations to be ended by 2030. And at the moment, there's an estimate there's over 40 million people around the world who are currently enslaved and can't escape their circumstances. So this group has set out to make a very significant contribution to that, to become the largest group of researchers working in this field in the world, and to build a strong research platform that can address the issues that need to be uncovered in order to address modern slavery. And they are addressing these series of questions in order to underpin those efforts. And they've developed a number of flagship data-driven projects that allow for this activity to be taken forward. They are the developers of the Global Slavery Index, for example, which can chart and measure the number of estimates of enslaved people in countries around the world, and that's been adopted by the United Nations. They are using satellite imagery, working with geospatial engineers to map particular activities that can be seen from space around the world in order to make much more clear estimates around this area. They've also been collecting testimonies from individuals who have experienced modern slavery, so that we can understand the impact on individuals and so forth. They're developing policy, investigating legislation, and are being partly funded by the UK government in order to do policy-related evidence work. And so far, and they are in their 2.5 years old, numerous achievements that we can see from them in terms of the different things that they've been doing. Very exciting work and very innovative that they've been doing, and definitely, absolutely addressing global sustainability goals. Future Food is another beacon which is set out to address food sustainability and work on a whole programme of activities in relation to this. As it happens, the University of Nottingham has a large farm of 500 acres. It has a dairy, has plant sciences, it has a vet school. So it has many of the things that you might want to have around you if we were going to address issues of food sustainability. And we also have campuses in China and Malaysia, activities in sub-Saharan Africa, and partnerships elsewhere that can enable us to do this kind of work. So Future Food are creating this integrated platform to facilitate impact across global food systems and address food security. And they have 4 areas in which they're looking at their work, from future-proofing agricultural systems to looking at micronutrients in food, to thinking about sustainable livelihoods from farmers and how can that be enhanced and increased in lower middle income countries, and thinking about smart manufacturing of food as well. So a whole range of activities. And just a couple of examples of projects. The cocoa production projects are very interesting in that they're working with small cocoa producers in Colombia to connect them directly to niche chocolate makers in our city of Nottingham, so that they are being able to eliminate the sort of middleman from producing cocoa to chocolate production by assisting these farmers, who are women, to have a special signature that relates back to their own production by using metagenomics and metabolomics around the fermentation process for cocoa beans. And they're also thinking about other projects that relate to particular crops in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. Propulsion Futures is a third beacon, and this is working towards the propulsion system of the future, moving towards electric transport, and in particular the electrification of air flight, which is the biggest challenge of all, thinking about long-haul air flight that might one day actually be propulsed by electricity or combined with hydrogen or whatever, instead of the current carbon fossil fuel model that we have today. And in Nottingham, we have the largest group of power electronic aeronautical engineers in the world. And they have got together with materials chemists to start working on a whole range of challenges, which is as difficult a challenge as it was to put a man on the moon in the NASA challenge, actually. And obviously, we're not, as a university, going to contribute to all of that, but our colleagues can do a number of things that will really begin to move this on. And they've chosen these 7 visions of areas in which they are going to be working in order to try and address this particular challenge. And interestingly, they also sit within one of the largest groupings of aerospace companies in the world, actually in the Midlands of the UK. And as that industry is going to be disrupted because the electrification agenda will change the kinds of products, companies, the supply chains, and so on, will need to support companies to reinvent themselves or create new supply chains of other companies in order to support what's going to be needed for the future. And we would very much like that to be able to stay in the UK rather than perhaps some of these industries moving elsewhere in the country, particularly pertinent for us in the context of Brexit and so forth. And again, this beacon is beginning to do some really exciting developments. And the picture on the left here is our latest science minister, who visited only last week to come and see what we were doing. We're showing her a big Rolls-Royce engine, and our electrical engineers are showing her the kinds of equipment they're trying to make that will ultimately replace that kind of a propulsion system. So just before I finish, I thought I would just say a few things about what we've learned about the features of these beacons, because they have been built from within the university. We weren't responding to a funding call from an external agency. So it's helped us understand what are the things that make these work. What are they becoming? Well, the way they've been developed, they're certainly acting as an accelerator and a catalyst for the funding helps to catalyse, build capacity. It's supporting many academics to develop at every career stage, from the early beginning research career to the senior career. It's opening up and kind of coalescing facilities and equipment together to be used and put to a particular purpose. And it's creating these platforms for really high impact research. Crucial, though, has been the kind of leader that each of these beacons has had. We didn't appoint a leader, we asked a leader to come forward from out of the groupings. And they have become very special and important people that are exhibiting some really particular skills. And we're sort of characterising this as a generous leader, a bit different from your sort of charismatic or directive leader that we might be used to in some more traditional research models. They need to be visionary and inspirational, but they also need to be sort of selfless about their own research. They sort of are convening and facilitating in a non-hierarchical way and building trust among whole groups of academics at every stage, fostering this interdisciplinary, collegiate action, they're fair, non-hierarchical, non-confrontational actually, and empathetic, great at negotiating with multiple partners and speaking with authority while not forefronting their own work. And that's why we've sort of characterised them. And these are the 4 of the beacons I've sort of talked to you about today. We've also thought about what are the features of success in addressing sustainability with actual impact and momentum. I think what we're doing here at Nottingham is creating these local to global critical mass platforms for convergence research. They are literally have a local hinterland around the university where we are, but they also have partnerships and activities that are spanning many countries of the world and collaborations with the best in the world, whether they be universities, companies or agencies. In the context of Rights Lab, it's NGOs, non-governmental organisations, for example. But they need to do this at sufficient scale to tackle the problem that they're going after with momentum. And they must provide a platform for different disciplines to work together across one institution, but also between institutions and organisations and across continents and across technologies. And I think most important of all, because I am leading this initiative in a university that has some very impatient characters within it, whether it be my chief financial officer or my vice chancellor, for example, who want to see results now, when actually these journeys are going to be, 10 or more years in the pursuing. They're not going to be fulfilled overnight, and we're only 2.5 years into that journey right now. So they need to be given time, their impact and value, and even where those may fail will only be known actually in time. But I think we can see already observable outcomes from the programme. They've certainly encouraged ambition. They've enabled the university to act in a strategic way, in a much more concerted way than probably we ever had before. They offer a very powerful signal to external parties and funding agencies who are now beginning to look to what can they bring to the party in relation to what we're doing. It helps us navigate complex structures within the university and bring disparate bits of it together. And it helps to connect, actually, really quite fundamental research to very applied activities behind a common goal, and attracts talent and funding. And I think, hopefully, a more efficient model of research, actually, if we're sort of coalescing facilities, for example. And so far, a very substantial leveraging effect. We're observing a 3-to-1 so far in 2.5 years of external funding coming in against the money the university has put in. And we hope also for this to have wider benefits for students, for the curriculum, for student attraction to the university. Again, we're seeing the power of these beacons with the sustainability agenda behind them being something that students want to come to our university to be part of and study with and see it as part of the university's raison d'etre. Finally, then, just what is it about creating a sustainable entity? We need to start thinking about that. We're beginning to think about what are the structures by which we will embed these into the university for the long term. They're each going to be owned by a faculty, although they will be a separate cost centre. The goal is for them to be self-sustaining at 5 years. They won't be given any more university money. And they need to then evolve and be able to achieve their mission, which is going to require them to secure substantial external funding. But it does require university support, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's support from the HR department, the communications and marketing, and so forth, in order for them to do the work that they do and fulfill their plans. And I think they are largely on a trajectory to become really critical platforms for a breakthrough science and innovation. And we're beginning to sort of see what these might evolve into, each probably rather different. So Rights Lab may become something more like a policy institute. The Future Food System is thinking about a future food systems institute. And And Propulsion Futures is likely to be a large end-to-end research group, which is embedded in this very large industry ecosystem, as I was describing earlier. So it's been a great journey so far, and I look forward to perhaps coming back and saying, where do we get to in another 2.5 years' time? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's see what questions we've got so far. This appears to be a top-down initiative, but what is the role of the bottom-up ideas?
So that's very interesting. It's a combination of top-down and bottom-up. So the top-down part of the initiative was the university saying, well, let's set out to do this. But in fact, the areas of research did come up from the bottom. And in fact, the directors of the beacons go out and work with academics across the university to find projects and support initiatives to come forward. So although the mission kind of seems like it's top down, it has emerged out of the university's strengths and community. It's an interesting, again, iteration between those two things, I think.
Thank you. Do you have any suggestion on how to promote internal collaboration before competition?
If I knew the answer to that, I'd be
silver bullet.
I'd be yes. But I think both of those things are healthy. They certainly have helped to bring people together and foster collaboration that might not have happened otherwise. And the leadership has been critical in the way those individuals have gone out and found people. It's been very helpful to have some pump priming funding to allow people to work together in a way they might not have done before. Having said that, we have discovered there's something called beacon envy.
Oh dear.
The parts of the university that feel they're not part of one of these. Which is part of the competition element that has a more negative side, I guess.
And how do you deal with the beacon envy?
Trying to allow as many people as possible to get involved. I think it's about making sure that it isn't the only thing that we're doing in the university for research. There are many other initiatives, many other groupings, many other activities that won't necessarily fit into this, and it's important to value those as much as the fact that we've got a sort of flagship program going on in the university. But it is a tension.
Of course. How important was central university leadership in establishing successful beacons as opposed to leadership by relatively independent faculties? I think the drive to establish the programme is a university leadership agenda, but we work very much in partnership. So our faculties have pro-vice chancellors who are my partners in the exercise, actually. So I think in collaboration, and we collectively agreed what the programme should look like. But it's a combination of both. Let's take one final question. Do the centres plan for sustainability after the funding period from the beginning of the programme or from the beginning of the programme?
Ideally, I think you'd be planning from the very beginning because sustainability takes a long time. So some examples of the way we thought about that was all of the academic appointments in a beacon have a home in a school in part of the university, and they're embedded in the establishment of the academic community in that school. So they don't belong as such to the beacon. They have a home school and they work within the beacon. So that is a model for sort of securing a future-proof to whatever might happen, and also feeling that these people are owned by a particular disciplinary group. So there are elements like that can help build for sustainability. Being very clear about the expectations that the funding is for 5 years. It's not to support things in perpetuity. But now we're having to do more work saying, well, there are core costs to these beacons. How are you going to make them sustainable? What are your plans for developing that? Finding external funding to cover off technicians or other elements that you would really miss if you didn't have them. Again, it's a journey to make sure that we can do that.
Well, thank you very much. I have a little gift for you here in the corner. Here you go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.